Marcus Thompson strutted through the glass doors of the regional office building like he owned the place. His expensive suit caught the morning light as he adjusted his tie with practiced arrogance. At 38, he had climbed the corporate ladder faster than most, and he made sure everyone knew it. His corner office on the 15th floor was a testament to his success, complete with awards lining the walls and a view that stretched across the city skyline. The morning started like any other Tuesday. Marcus grabbed his usual double espresso from the lobby cafe, barely acknowledging the barista who knew his order by heart. He stepped into the elevator, already mentally preparing for the department meeting that would showcase his latest project proposal. The elevator stopped at the 7th floor, and a woman stepped in. She was dressed simply in a plain navy blazer and black slacks, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had seen better days. Her graying hair was pulled back in a modest bun, and she wore no makeup. Most striking of all, she said nothing as she entered the elevator. She simply pressed the button for the 12th floor and stood quietly in the corner, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Marcus glanced at her with mild curiosity, then dismissive judgment. He had never seen her before, which was unusual since he prided himself on knowing everyone important in the building. Her clothes suggested she was probably some low-level administrative worker, maybe a secretary or filing clerk. The way she carried herself, quiet and unassuming, confirmed his initial assessment. The elevator climbed slowly, and Marcus found himself growing impatient with the silence. He was used to people acknowledging his presence, especially in such a confined space. He cleared his throat loudly, expecting her to look his way or at least say good morning. She did neither. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone of authority he had perfected over years of managing subordinates. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Marcus Thompson, Regional Sales Director." The woman turned her head slightly toward him but said nothing. Her expression remained neutral, almost blank. She simply nodded once and returned her gaze to the floor numbers lighting up above the door. Marcus felt a flicker of irritation. In his world, when Marcus Thompson introduced himself, people responded with enthusiasm, sometimes even nervousness. They shook his hand eagerly and often launched into explanations of who they were and what they did, hopping to make a good impression. This woman's silence struck him as incredibly rude. "Are you new here?" he pressed, stepping slightly closer to her. "I like to know all the staff in the building. What department are you in?" Again, the woman remained silent. She shifted her briefcase from one hand to the other and checked her watch, but offered no response to his questions. The elevator seemed to be moving slower than usual, and Marcus found himself growing more annoyed by the second. "Cat got your tongue?" Marcus said with a condescending chuckle. "Or maybe you don't speak English very well. I know the company has been hearing more diverse staff lately." The woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she still didn't speak. Marcus interpreted this as confirmation of his assumption. "Look, I understand if communication is difficult for you," Marcus continued, his tone becoming more patronizing with each word. "But basic courtesy is important in a professional environment. When someone introduces themselves, especially someone in management, the polite thing to do is respond." The elevator chimed softly as it passed the 10th floor. Marcus realized he had only 2 more floors to make his point. "I'm going to assume you're having trouble understanding me," Marcus said, speaking slower and louder, as if volume would somehow bridge whatever gap he imagined existed. "Let me make this simple. I run sales for this entire region. That means I have influence over hearing and firing decisions throughout this building. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The woman finally turned to look at him directly. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, and for a moment Marcus thought he saw something that looked almost like pity in her expression. But she still said nothing. "Unbelievable," Marcus muttered, shaking his head. "This is exactly what's wrong with this company's hearing practices. They bring in people who can't even hold a basic conversation." The elevator chimed again at the 11th floor. Marcus was running out of time to make his point, and the woman's continued silence was infuriating him beyond reason. "Let me give you some free advice," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you want to succeed in this company, you need to learn how to interact with people, especially people like me who actually matter around here. Your little silent act might work in whatever department stuck you in some back room filing papers, but it won't fly if you ever want to advance." The woman adjusted her briefcase again and took a small step toward the elevator buttons. Marcus noticed She was wearing simple black flats that were clearly not expensive, further confirming his assessment of her position in the company hierarchy. "I'm trying to help you here," Marcus continued. "I've seen plenty of people like you come and go. They think they can just keep their heads down and do their little jobs without engaging with the important people in the company. But that's not how success works. You need to network, make connections, show that you understand how things really operate." The elevator slowed as it approached the 12th floor. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction, believing he had delivered an important lesson to this clearly inexperienced employee. "One more piece of advice," Marcus said as the elevator came to a stop. "When you see me in the hallways or in meetings, a simple "Good morning, Mr. Thompson" would go a long way. I remember faces, and I remember people who show proper respect." The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. The woman stepped out without looking back, her footsteps quiet on the polished marble floor of the 12th floor. Marcus watched her go, shaking his head in disgust at what he saw as a perfect example of the decline in professional standards. He remained in the elevator as the doors closed, riding up to his own floor with a sense of smug satisfaction. He had handled that situation exactly as it needed to be handled. Someone had to teach these people how things worked in the real world of business. Marcus Thompson was always willing to be that someone. As he stepped out onto the 15th floor, his secretary Jennifer greeted him with her usual bright smile. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Don't forget you have the quarterly review meeting at 10:30. "Right," Marcus said, already putting the elevator encounter out of his mind. "Make sure the conference room is set up properly. I want everything perfect for my presentation." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, sir, and congratulations on the Morrison account. I heard you closed that deal yesterday." Marcus preened at the praise. This was more like it. This was how people should respond to his presence and achievements. "Just doing what I do best, Jennifer. Excellence is a habit, not an accident." He walked into his office and settled behind his massive mahogany desk. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the city spreading out below him like a kingdom he ruled. His computer screen showed 17 new emails, most of them from subordinates seeking his approval or input on various projects. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. Let that strange woman in the elevator stay silent and invisible in whatever corner of the building they had stuck her. He had more important things to worry about. He had an empire to run, deals to close, and people to manage. The world of business belonged to people like him, people who understood how to command respect and get results. Little did Marcus know that his world was about to be turned completely upside down. The quarterly review meeting was Marcus's favorite kind of gathering. 23 department heads and senior managers crowded around the polished conference table, all eager to hear his latest triumph. Marcus had prepared meticulously for this presentation, knowing it would showcase not just his recent successes, but his natural leadership abilities. He stood at the head of the table, clicking through his PowerPoint slides with practiced confidence. Charts and graphs filled the large screen, each one telling the story of increased revenue, expanded market share, and exceeded targets. His voice carried easily through the room as he explained his innovative strategies and bold decision-making. "As you can see from these numbers," Marcus said, pointing to a particularly impressive chart, "my approach to the Henderson Industries contract resulted in a 43% increase over their previous spending. This wasn't luck, people. This was strategic thinking combined with superior negotiation skills." Several heads nodded around the table. Marcus caught sight of David Chen from marketing, who was furiously taking notes. Good. David understood what real leadership looked like. Marcus made a mental note to consider David for advancement, assuming he continued to show such appropriate respect. "The key to my success," Marcus continued, "is understanding that business is about relationships built on mutual respect and clear communication. When clients see that you command authority and expect excellence, they respond accordingly. They want to work with winners." Sarah Williams from Human Resources raised her hand tentatively. "Marcus, these results are certainly impressive. Could you walk us through some of the specific techniques you used to achieve such significant improvements?" Marcus smiled broadly. This was exactly the kind of question he loved to answer. "Absolutely, Sarah. It all comes down to establishing dominance in the relationship from the very first interaction. When I walked into that initial meeting with Henderson Industries, I made sure they understood exactly who they were dealing with. He launched into a detailed account of his negotiation process, emphasizing how his commanding presence and refusal to accept anything less than perfect terms had ultimately secured the deal. The room remained attentive, though Marcus noticed a few people exchanging glances he couldn't quite interpret. Another crucial element, Marcus continued, is knowing how to handle different types of people. Some clients need a firm hand, some need to be educated about how business really works, and some, frankly, need to be taught their place in the professional hierarchy. As Marcus spoke, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. The conference room doors had opened, and someone was entering quietly. He continued his presentation without breaking stride, assuming it was probably someone from the IT department coming to adjust the projector or check the audio system. The bottom line is this, Marcus said, building toward his conclusion. Success in business requires confidence, authority, and the ability to communicate effectively with everyone from the executive suite down to the filing clerks. You have to know how to interact with people at every level, even when they don't necessarily understand the bigger picture. He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. This was always his favorite moment in these presentations, when he could see the impact of his wisdom on his colleagues' faces. Questions? Marcus asked, scanning the room with satisfaction. It was then that he noticed the woman from the elevator. She was sitting at the far end of the conference table in a chair that had been empty when he began his presentation. She still wore the same plain navy blazer and carried the same worn briefcase. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her, and she was looking directly at him with that same neutral expression he remembered from their encounter. Marcus felt a momentary flicker of confusion. What was she doing here? This was a senior management meeting. Filing clerks and administrative assistants weren't invited to these sessions. Someone had obviously made a mistake. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his tone polite but firm. "I think there might be some confusion. This is a closed meeting for department heads and senior managers only." The woman said nothing. She simply continued to look at him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. Around the table, Marcus noticed something strange happening. Several of his colleagues were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah Williams looked like she was trying very hard not to smile. David Chen had stopped taking notes and was staring down at his hands. The overall energy in the room had changed dramatically, though Marcus couldn't understand why. "I'm sorry," Marcus continued, addressing the woman directly. "I don't know how you got in here, but you'll need to leave. We're in the middle of an important presentation." Still, the woman remained silent. But now she did something that surprised Marcus. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small leather portfolio. She set it on the table in front of her and folded her hands over it. Marcus was beginning to feel genuinely annoyed. First the elevator incident, and now this. What was wrong with this woman? Didn't she understand basic professional protocols? "Look," Marcus said, his patience wearing thin. "I tried to help you this morning in the elevator. I explained how things work around here, basic courtesy and respect for hierarchy. This is exactly what I was talking about." The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words, but still she said nothing. Marcus looked around the table, expecting support from his colleagues. Instead, he saw expressions ranging from discomfort to barely concealed horror. Robert Martinez from accounting was actually covering his face with his hands. "Can someone please explain to me what's going on here?" Marcus demanded. "Why is everyone acting so strange, and why is this woman still in our meeting?" Sarah Williams cleared her throat nervously. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I think maybe you should." "No," Marcus interrupted. "I've had enough of this nonsense." "Ma'am," he said, turning back to the silent woman, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. If you don't understand English well enough to follow simple instructions, I can have someone from HR escort you out." The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She sat up slightly straighter and placed her hands flat on the table on either side of the leather portfolio. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, now fully committed to making his point, "I'm going to have to report this incident to whoever is responsible for your supervision. This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable in a professional environment. Walking into meetings you weren't invited to, ignoring direct instructions from senior management. It's exactly the kind of thing that gets people terminated." The room had become so quiet that Marcus could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Everyone was staring at him now, and the expressions on their faces were making him increasingly uncomfortable. But he had gone too far to back down now. "I want to know your name and what department you work in," Marcus demanded. "Someone is going to answer for this disruption." The woman looked around the table slowly, making eye contact with several of the other attendees. Then she opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the table in front of her, but she still didn't speak. Marcus was about to continue his tirade when Jennifer burst through the conference room doors, her face flushed and her eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Thompson," she gasped, "I've been trying to reach you. There's been a terrible mistake. The Inspector General arrived this morning for the surprise audit and we can't find." Jennifer stopped mid-sentence as her eyes fell on the woman at the end of the table. The color drained from her face completely. "Oh no," Jennifer whispered. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Marcus looked from Jennifer to the woman and back again. A cold sensation was beginning to creep up his spine. "Jennifer," he said slowly, "what exactly are you trying to tell me?" The woman at the end of the table finally spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried an unmistakable tone of authority. "Perhaps I should introduce myself properly," she said. "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. I'm the Inspector General for the Pacific Regional Division. I arrived this morning to conduct an unannounced audit of this facility's operations and management practices." The conference room fell into a silence so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison's words hung in the air like a judgment already passed. The Inspector General, the most feared position in the entire corporate hierarchy, the person who could end careers with a single report. And Marcus had just spent the last 2 hours treating her like she was invisible. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world begin to crumble around him. His mouth went dry, and his hands started to shake slightly. He looked around the table at his colleagues, hoping to see confusion or disbelief that might indicate this was some kind of misunderstanding. Instead, he saw expressions of profound sympathy mixed with relief that they weren't in his position. Dr. Morrison reached into her briefcase again and pulled out a thick folder. She opened it methodically, revealing what appeared to be detailed notes and documentation. Marcus caught glimpses of organizational charts, personnel files, and what looked like transcripts of conversations. "I apologize for not introducing myself earlier," Dr. Morrison continued, her voice remaining perfectly calm and professional. "But part of my methodology involves observing natural behavior patterns before people become aware of my presence. I find it provides valuable insights into the actual culture and management practices within an organization." Marcus tried to speak, but no words came out. His throat felt like it was closing. He had built his entire career on his ability to read situations and respond appropriately, but this was so far outside his experience that his mind simply couldn't process it. "I've been conducting preliminary observations since early this morning," Dr. Morrison continued. "I've spoken with various employees at different levels of the organization, reviewed recent performance data, and observed several interactions between management and staff." She turned to a specific page in her folder and adjusted her glasses slightly. Marcus noticed for the first time that they were expensive designer frames, the kind that successful executives wore. How had he missed that detail? "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Morrison said, looking directly at him, "I understand you've had quite a successful run as regional sales director. Your numbers are certainly impressive." Marcus felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe this wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe his track record would count for something. "However," Dr. Morrison continued, and that single word extinguished any optimism Marcus might have felt, "success metrics tell only part of the story. My role is to evaluate not just what results are achieved, but how they're achieved. The methods, the culture, the treatment of colleagues and subordinates." She flipped to another page in her folder. "I'm particularly interested in leadership philosophy and interpersonal management style. How people in positions of authority interact with those they perceive to be below them in the organizational hierarchy." Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew exactly where this was heading. "This morning's elevator encounter was quite illuminating," Dr. Morrison said. "Would you like to tell me about your thought process during that interaction?" Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times, trying to formulate some kind of response that might salvage the situation. But everything he had said in that elevator now seemed to replay in his mind like evidence in a trial. I didn't know who you were," Marcus finally managed to say. "If I had known." "If you had known I was the Inspector General, you would have treated me differently," Dr. Morrison interrupted. "That's exactly the kind of insight I'm looking for, Mr. Thompson. You're telling me that your treatment of people depends entirely on their position and usefulness to you." Around the table, Marcus could see his colleagues trying to make themselves invisible. Some were staring at their hands, others were looking out the window, and a few were slowly gathering their materials as if preparing to escape at the first opportunity. "That's not what I meant," Marcus said desperately. "I mean, I treat everyone with respect. I was just trying to be friendly in the elevator. Maybe I misunderstood the situation." Dr. Morrison consulted her notes again. "According to my documentation, you made several interesting statements during our brief encounter. You questioned my ability to speak English, suggested that my silence was evidence of inferior communication skills, and informed me that people like me come and go, while people like you actually matter around here." Each quoted phrase hit Marcus like a physical blow. Hearing his own words repeated back to him in Dr. Morrison's measured tone made them sound even worse than he remembered. "You also told me that I needed to learn how to interact with important people, and you specifically mentioned your influence over hearing and firing decisions," Dr. Morrison continued. "You advised me that success requires networking with the right people and showing proper respect to management." Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead. "I was just trying to help," he said weakly. "I thought you might be new and didn't understand the company culture." "The company culture," Dr. Morrison repeated thoughtfully. "That's another interesting point. Let me share what I've learned about the culture you've helped create in your department." She turned to a different section of her folder, one filled with what looked like interview transcripts and employee feedback forms. "I've spoken with 17 of your direct reports and colleagues over the past 3 hours," Dr. Morrison said. "The feedback has been remarkably consistent. Words that came up repeatedly include intimidating, condescending, arrogant, and dismissive. Several people mentioned feeling afraid to speak up in meetings when they disagree with your approach." Marcus felt like he was sinking into quicksand. Every word Dr. Morrison spoke pushed him deeper into a hole he couldn't escape. One particularly telling comment came from a junior analyst who said, and I quote, "Mr. Thompson makes it clear that if you're not useful to him, you're invisible to him." Another employee mentioned that you often speak differently to people based on what you perceive their status to be. Dr. Morrison closed that section of her folder and looked directly at Marcus again. "But the most concerning feedback relates to your treatment of support staff, administrative personnel, and anyone you consider to be in a lower position than yourself." She paused, letting her words sink in. The conference room remained absolutely silent except for the faint sounds of the city filtering in through the windows. "Linda Martinez from the filing department told me about an incident last month where you berated her in front of several other employees because she couldn't immediately locate a document you needed. According to witnesses, you told her that her job was simple enough that anyone with half a brain could do it." Marcus remembered the incident. Linda had been slow to find the Henderson contract, and he had been under pressure to get the information to a client quickly. But hearing it described now, in this context, made it sound much worse than he had intended. "James Ockhaffer from maintenance mentioned that you consistently treat him as if he's invisible, walking past him in hallways without acknowledgement, interrupting his work without asking permission, and generally acting as if he doesn't exist." Dr. Morrison flipped to another page. "And then there's the incident with Maria Santos from customer service. 3 separate witnesses described you publicly questioning her competence because of her accent, suggesting that the company should hire people who can communicate properly with important clients." Each example felt like another nail in Marcus's professional coffin. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that these incidents were being taken out of context or blown out of proportion. But looking at Dr. Morrison's thorough documentation and the expressions on his colleagues' faces, he realized that his behavior had been noticed and discussed far more than he had ever imagined. "The pattern that emerges from these interactions," Dr. Morrison continued, "is one of a manager who divides people into categories, useful and useless, important and unimportant, worthy of respect and beneath notice. This kind of hierarchical thinking doesn't just affect morale, it creates systemic problems that ultimately impact the entire organization's effectiveness. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. What happens now? Dr. Morrison closed her folder and looked around the table at the other attendees. That depends on several factors, Mr. Thompson. This audit is just beginning, and I'll be spending the next 2 weeks conducting a comprehensive review of management practices throughout this facility. She stood up, gathering her materials with the same calm efficiency she had displayed throughout the meeting. However, I can tell you that what I've observed so far represents a serious concern that will need to be addressed at the highest levels of the organization. As Dr. Morrison moved toward the door, Marcus realized that everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was hanging by a thread. And that thread was being held by the same woman he had dismissed as insignificant just hours earlier. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Marcus Thompson's life. Dr. Morrison conducted her audit with surgical precision, methodically examining every aspect of the organization's operations. She interviewed employees at all levels, reviewed policies and procedures, analyzed performance data, and observed day-to-day interactions throughout the building. Marcus found himself under constant scrutiny. Every conversation, every decision, every interaction was now viewed through the lens of Dr. Morrison's investigation. He tried to modify his behavior, to demonstrate that he could be the kind of leader the company needed, but the damage had already been done. His reputation preceded him into every room, and his attempts at kindness and respect felt forced and desperate. The worst part was watching his colleagues' attitudes toward him shift. People who had once competed for his attention now avoided him in the hallways. David Chen, who had taken such careful notes during Marcus's presentations, now barely made eye contact. Sarah Williams from Human Resources spoke to him only when absolutely necessary, and then with the kind of careful professionalism reserved for difficult situations. Marcus's secretary Jennifer tried to remain supportive, but even she seemed nervous and uncertain. She had always been eager to please, anticipating his needs and celebrating his successes. Now she answered his questions directly, but without the enthusiasm that had once characterized their working relationship. On the Wednesday of the second week, Marcus received a call that made his blood run cold. Dr. Morrison requested a private meeting in the executive conference room, not his office, where he might feel some sense of control, but the formal conference room where the most serious corporate discussions took place. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to compose himself and perhaps gain some psychological advantage by being settled in the room first. But Dr. Morrison was already there, seated at the large table with several folders spread out in front of her. She looked up as he entered and gestured to a chair across from her. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thompson," she said, in the same measured tone he had come to dread. "I wanted to discuss my findings with you before I submit my final report to corporate headquarters." Marcus sat down carefully, trying to read her expression for any hint of what was coming. Dr. Morrison's face remained neutral, professional, revealing nothing. "Over the past 2 weeks, I've conducted 63 interviews with employees at every level of this organization," Dr. Morrison began. "I've reviewed 5 years of personnel files, performance evaluations, and disciplinary actions. I've observed dozens of meetings, interactions, and day-to-day operations." She opened one of the folders and consulted a page of notes. "The picture that emerges is complex, Mr. Thompson. On one hand, this facility has achieved impressive financial results. Revenue is up, client satisfaction scores are generally positive, and several major contracts have been successfully negotiated and maintained." Marcus felt a small surge of hope. Maybe his track record would count for something after all. "However," Dr. Morrison continued, and Marcus's hope immediately evaporated, "my investigation has revealed systemic problems in management culture that pose serious risks to the organization's long-term health and legal compliance." She turned to a different section of her documentation. "I've documented 47 separate incidents over the past 18 months involving what employees describe as discriminatory, dismissive, or hostile behavior from management. The vast majority of these incidents involve interactions between yourself and employees you perceive to be in subordinate positions." Marcus wanted to defend himself, But he had learned enough over the past 2 weeks to know that interrupting Dr. Morrison would only make things worse. More concerning is the pattern of behavior that suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of professional leadership responsibilities, Dr. Morrison continued. Leadership is not about establishing dominance or hierarchy. It's about creating an environment where everyone can contribute effectively to the organization's success. She pulled out a thick document that Marcus recognized as an employee satisfaction survey. The results of this survey are particularly telling. While employees generally report satisfaction with their compensation and benefits, the scores for respect from management, feeling valued, and psychological safety are among the lowest I've seen in 15 years of conducting these audits. Dr. Morrison flipped through several pages, highlighting specific responses. Here's a comment from an administrative assistant. I feel like I have to prove my worth every day just to be treated like a human being. From a maintenance worker, management acts like we're invisible unless they need something. From a junior analyst, I'm afraid to speak up in meetings because I know my ideas will be dismissed if they don't align with what certain managers want to hear. Each comment felt like a personal indictment. Marcus realized that while he had been focused on achieving results and climbing the corporate ladder, he had been creating an environment that made other people miserable. But perhaps most significant, Dr. Morrison continued, is the legal exposure this kind of management culture creates. I've identified at least 12 incidents that could potentially form the basis for discrimination or hostile workplace complaints. The company's legal department will need to review these situations carefully. Marcus's heart sank. Legal exposure meant potential lawsuits, investigations, and the kind of corporate attention that could end careers permanently. Dr. Morrison closed the survey document and looked directly at him. Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand that I don't believe you set out to create these problems. I think you genuinely believed that your approach was effective leadership. But impact matters more than intent, and the impact of your leadership style has been damaging to both employees and the organization. For the first time in weeks, Marcus found his voice. Dr. Morrison, I know I've made mistakes. I can change. I can be a better leader. Just give me a chance to prove that I can do better. Dr. Morrison considered his words carefully. That's exactly what I hoped you would say, Mr. Thompson. Because despite everything I've documented, I believe that people can change and grow. The question is whether you truly understand what needs to change, and whether you're committed to doing the hard work that real transformation requires. She opened a final folder and pulled out what appeared to be a formal recommendation document. I'm prepared to offer you a choice, Mr. Thompson. You can accept immediate termination with a standard severance package, which would allow you to leave with your reputation somewhat intact. Or you can accept a comprehensive performance improvement plan that will require you to demonstrate fundamental changes in your leadership approach. Marcus felt a glimmer of hope mixed with apprehension. What would the improvement plan involve? 6 months of intensive coaching with a leadership development specialist, Dr. Morrison explained. Monthly evaluations based on employee feedback and observed behavior. Mandatory training in inclusive management practices, emotional intelligence, and respectful workplace communication. And most importantly, a temporary demotion to senior sales representative, reporting to someone else while you work on rebuilding your leadership skills. The proposal was humbling, perhaps humiliating. Marcus had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, and now he was being asked to voluntarily step down. But the alternative was losing his job entirely, and despite everything that had happened, he realized he didn't want to give up. If I complete the improvement plan successfully, Marcus asked, would there be a possibility of returning to management? Dr. Morrison nodded. That would depend entirely on your progress and the feedback from employees who work with you. Real change takes time, Mr. Thompson. It's not enough to modify your behavior temporarily. You need to fundamentally shift how you think about leadership, respect, and human dignity. Marcus looked down at the table, processing everything Dr. Morrison had told him. 2 weeks ago, he had been on top of the world, confident in his success and convinced of his own importance. Now he was being offered a chance to rebuild himself from the ground up. I'll take the improvement plan, Marcus said quietly. I want to learn how to be better. Dr. Morrison made a note in her documentation. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Thompson, because the real work is just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in the same elevator where his transformation had begun. But everything about him had changed. Gone was the expensive suit and arrogant posture. Instead, he wore a modest business outfit and carried himself with quiet humility. Most importantly, when the elevator stopped and Linda Martinez from the filing department stepped in, Marcus smiled genuinely and said, "Good morning, Linda. How are you doing today?" Linda looked surprised for a moment, then smiled back warmly. "I'm doing well, Marcus. Thank you for asking. How's your mother recovering from her surgery?" "She's doing much better, thanks for remembering," Marcus replied. "The physical therapy is helping a lot." This simple exchange would have been impossible for the old Marcus. He had never bothered to learn personal details about employees he considered beneath his notice, and he certainly would never have shared information about his family with someone he saw as unimportant. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and transformative period of Marcus's life. The leadership coach Dr. Morrison had assigned, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, had systematically dismantled every assumption Marcus had held about successful management. Through role-playing exercises, 360-degree feedback sessions, and painful, honest conversations, Marcus had been forced to confront the reality of how his behavior had affected others. The most difficult part had been the monthly feedback sessions with employees. Sitting in conference rooms while colleagues and former subordinates honestly described how his leadership had made them feel was excruciating. Hearing Maria Santos explain how his comments about her accent had made her question her own competence, or listening to James Ockhaffer describe feeling invisible and unimportant, had forced Marcus to see himself through completely different eyes. But gradually, as Marcus began to change his behavior and mindset, the feedback started to shift. People noticed when he remembered their names, when he asked about their projects with genuine interest, when he listened to their ideas without immediately dismissing them. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was real and sustained. Working as a senior sales representative under David Chen's management had been another humbling experience. David, who had once taken careful notes during Marcus's presentations, now provided guidance and direction. Initially, Marcus struggled with the role reversal, but David proved to be exactly the kind of leader Marcus was learning to become: supportive, inclusive, and focused on bringing out the best in his team members. "Marcus, you've got natural talent for building client relationships," David had told him during one of their weekly one-on-one meetings. "But your real strength is starting to be how you collaborate with the rest of the team. People trust you now in a way they never did before." That trust had been hard-earned. Marcus had to prove, through consistent actions over months, that his changed behavior wasn't just temporary performance for Dr. Morrison's evaluation. He had apologized personally to every employee he had treated poorly, not with grand gestures or formal statements, but with quiet, sincere conversations where he took full responsibility for his past behavior and asked what he could do to repair the damage. The apology to Linda Martinez had been particularly meaningful. Marcus had found her in the filing room during her lunch break and asked if she had a few minutes to talk. He had expected her to be cold or dismissive, given how he had humiliated her in front of other employees. Instead, she had listened carefully as he explained how sorry he was and how much he had learned from his mistakes. "I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Thompson," Linda had said. "It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong. I hope you know that I never wanted to see you fail. I just wanted to be treated with basic respect." "Please call me Marcus," he had replied. "And you were right to expect respect. Everyone deserves that regardless of their position." Now, months later, Marcus and Linda had developed a genuine working relationship built on mutual respect. When Marcus needed documents or files, he asked politely and said thank you. When Linda had suggestions for improving filing systems or processes, Marcus listened and helped implement her ideas. The change seemed small, but it represented a fundamental shift in how Marcus understood professional relationships. The elevator reached Linda's floor, and she stepped out with a friendly wave. "Have a great day, Marcus. Good luck with your presentation this afternoon." Marcus smiled and waved back. The presentation Linda was referring to was his final evaluation with Dr. Morrison and the executive committee. After 6 months of intensive development work, today would determine whether he could return to a management position or whether his career would take a different direction. As the elevator continued to the 12th floor, Marcus reflected on how much he had learned. Dr. Reeves had taught him that real leadership wasn't about commanding respect through authority or fear. It was about earning respect through competence, integrity, and genuine care for the people you worked with. She had shown him that treating people well wasn't just morally right, it was also more effective for achieving business results. The elevator opened at the 12th floor, and Marcus stepped out onto the same marble floor where Dr. Morrison had walked away from him 6 months earlier. But now he knew this floor well. He had spent countless hours here in training sessions, coaching meetings, and feedback discussions. The executive conference room at the end of the hall had become familiar territory. Marcus walked down the hallway, exchanging greetings with several people he passed. 6 months ago, most of these employees would have avoided eye contact or offered only perfunctory acknowledgments. Now they seemed genuinely pleased to see him, asking about his projects and sharing updates about their own work. He paused outside the conference room door, taking a deep breath and centering himself. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine the direction of his career and possibly his life. But regardless of the outcome, Marcus knew he was a fundamentally different person than he had been 6 months earlier. He knocked on the door and heard Dr. Morrison's familiar voice call out, "Come in." Marcus entered the conference room to find Dr. Morrison seated at the same table where she had delivered her devastating audit results. But this time, she wasn't alone. David Chen was there, along with Sarah Williams from Human Resources and 3 executives from corporate headquarters whom Marcus recognized but had never met personally. "Good afternoon, Marcus," Dr. Morrison said, and Marcus noticed that she used his first name rather than the formal Mr. Thompson she had employed during their previous interactions. "Please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." Marcus sat down, feeling nervous but not panicked. Whatever was about to happen, he knew he had done everything possible to earn this opportunity. Dr. Morrison opened a folder, but this one was much thinner than the thick documentation she had compiled during her original audit. "Marcus, I want to start by saying that the transformation we've observed over the past 6 months has been remarkable, not just in terms of changed behavior, but in terms of fundamental shifts in attitude, perspective, and leadership philosophy." She turned to David Chen. "David, would you like to share your observations?" David smiled warmly at Marcus. "Working with Marcus over the past 6 months has been a privilege," he said. "He's not just learned new management techniques, he's become genuinely invested in helping other people succeed. His collaboration skills, his emotional intelligence, and his commitment to inclusive leadership have all grown tremendously." Sarah Williams nodded in agreement. "The employee feedback has been consistently positive for the past 3 months," she said. "People who were previously afraid to interact with Marcus now seek him out for advice and support. That's not something you can fake." One of the corporate executives, a distinguished woman Marcus recognized as the regional vice president, leaned forward. "Marcus, Dr. Morrison's initial audit identified some serious problems in management culture at this facility, but her follow-up report describes one of the most successful leadership transformation programs she's ever supervised. That kind of personal growth is exactly what our company needs." Marcus felt a surge of hope, but he kept his expression neutral. He had learned not to assume outcomes before they were clearly stated. Dr. Morrison consulted her notes. Based on 6 months of intensive evaluation, including monthly 360-degree feedback assessments, observed interactions with employees at all levels, and demonstrated competency in inclusive leadership practices, I'm prepared to recommend that Marcus be reinstated to a management position. Marcus felt relief wash over him, but Dr. Morrison wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "this won't be a return to your previous role. The regional sales director position requires someone with more experience in the leadership principles you're still developing. Instead, we're offering you a position as sales team manager, leading a group of 8 sales representatives. It's an opportunity to apply what you've learned while continuing to grow as a leader." Marcus nodded eagerly. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," he said. "I know I have more to learn, and I'm committed to continuing to grow." Dr. Morrison smiled, and Marcus realized it was the first time he had ever seen her look genuinely pleased. "I believe you are, Marcus, and I think you're going to be surprised by how much more effective you can be as a leader when you focus on bringing out the best in other people rather than just proving your own importance." As the meeting concluded, and Marcus shook hands with everyone around the table, he reflected on the incredible journey he had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a successful but deeply flawed manager who treated people as tools for his own advancement. Today, He was a leader who understood that real success came from helping others achieve their potential. The elevator ride back to his new office was different from that morning months ago when he had encountered Dr. Morrison. This time, Marcus wasn't thinking about his own status or importance. Instead, he was thinking about the 8 sales representatives he would soon be leading and how he could help each of them grow and succeed. He had learned that leadership wasn't about commanding respect from above. It was about earning respect through service to others. And that lesson, taught by a woman whose quiet dignity he had initially mistaken for weakness, had transformed not just his career, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be truly successful. Marcus smiled as the elevator doors opened onto his floor. He had work to do, people to serve, and a team to build. And for the first time in his professional life, he was excited about the opportunity to put others' success ahead of his own.